Welcome, everybody. If you're just joining in, this is Fayruz Benyousef, and we've got a wonderful talk for you this evening. Muhi is waving at you. Shadia, who's the founder of Muslim Space, is just trying to set this up to go live on Facebook. So we're just giving a couple moments here for her to come back in and get us going, inshallah. Looks like it's live. Perfect. Good job, Shadia.
Knew you could do it.
Yay.
Alhamdulillah.
All right, well, welcome everybody. My name is Shadia Igram. I'm the executive director of Muslim Space. We are a nonprofit based here in Austin, Texas, where we primarily serve the faith-based, service-based, and social-based needs of the American Muslim community, and then also through serving the wider Austin community. I'm very, very excited to host this event through Muslim Space with the American Muslim Community Foundation and Muhi Khwaja and one of our own, Fayruz Benyousef. I was connected with Muhi a few months ago where he was going to be coming into Austin and wanted to meet with some community members to share the work that he does. And we had it all set. And then of course, COVID-19 happened and we had to scrap that. But alhamdulillah, everything is now virtual and we were able to do this, and inshallah it's going to be even better than we had originally planned. So I am very grateful to Allah for allowing this to happen, for Muhi for being so flexible and working with us, of course Fayruz for joining us and eagerly being enthusiastic about moderating and co-hosting this. So with that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Muhi and Fayruz and let them have at it.
Awesome. Thank you, Shadia. And Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. We're thrilled to be doing this and grateful, alhamdulillah, as she said, to be able to be doing it virtually. We're going to have a chat today. And the forum for this is going to be that Muhi's going to walk us through a wonderful presentation. So as you are listening, as you are reflecting, I invite and encourage you to share questions, use the chat aspect here of this meeting and let us know. Shadia is going to be monitoring that. We had some advanced questions that were submitted that you'll see as we get to the end that we'll go through, but we really welcome any question that you all may think of. I am so honored to be a member of Muslim Space. I'm grateful to Shadia and to the board for creating this wonderful organization. I live here in Austin, Texas with my family, and I am a practitioner of this wonderful value of sadaqah, not just personally, but also as a professional in the field. I have a philanthropy practice that advises individuals and organizations on how to do this, and especially how to do it in large-scale ways when they are looking to build something new, create a vision. So it is an absolute honor to be able to co-partner here with Muhi, and he is so brilliant, as you all will see in moments, mashallah. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Muhi, and let you take us through the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Fayruz and Shadia and Muslim Space. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm just really excited to spend time with you to talk about social justice and Islam and kind of exploring those themes together. So just very briefly on American Muslim Community Foundation, we are a national organization. We help families distribute their sadaqah and zakat. We help nonprofit organizations with their sustainability. So large picture, we've been able to give now over $2 million to nonprofits since 2017. And we have a nonprofit directory. We're doing a daily 5 Fast Minutes podcast in Ramadan, which will lead to a full-length feature podcast afterwards. So take a look if you're interested in learning about different organizations that you can give to. It's a perfect way to kind of explore that with your friends and family. So yeah, let's jump into it. On the flyer, we talked about the verse that says, enjoin what is right and forbid what is wrong. So Fayruz, just kind of like thinking about this theme and this event, like, let's explore that a little bit and unpackage it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, this is ingrained for us as part of our faith practice. And what's great to me as someone who has lived here the bulk of my life, although I was born in Libya, is that in this American culture, philanthropy and the practice of philanthropy is very much a part of the fabric of society here. And you can be whatever faith you are, and practice philanthropy. But what to me is most beautiful is the fact that this is part of us as Muslims as well. And so, Muhi, you're teeing up these Quranic ayat for us, and then we'll see here in a moment, even hadith, I think is very special if you want to kind of talk a little bit about this first one.
Yeah, of course. And, throughout our teaching, and, I'm like a Sunday school kid that, this is my level of education. So don't like think of me as anything more than that. But just being able to take benefit from these ayat and reflecting on how our faith guides us to do what is right and help other people. I'm continuously inspired as I continue to learn more about Islam every day, how we can best practice this faith with other people as well. And if you think of all of the different pillars of Islam, Hajj is like super congregational, right? It's a mass gathering of people. Prayer, again, you're encouraged to do it with other people. And I was just on a webinar yesterday where they were talking about how zakat is one of those things that necessarily is done more individually, right? But all of these other things in our faith that we're guided to do is so congregational. So I really thought that was enlightening when I heard that. And the whole idea of social justice, of trying to help other people in need, is in line with philanthropic values, really, because the definition of philanthropy is love of mankind, right? And what better way to show that love than to call people to what is right and kind of guide them in saying, like, that's probably not the best thing for us to do as a collective society, but let's steer towards things that would benefit society as well.
Hey, Muhi, one thing that I also want to just interject in this time that we're in, that I've read a lot about and I've been talking with colleagues and friends about, is that in a very bizarre kind of way, this COVID-19 situation is leveling the playing field, for lack of a better sort of term. Early on in this pandemic, we were visiting, before sort of everybody was told shelter in place, my in-laws in Houston. And my father-in-law, who had gone to the Jummah prayer that day, was sharing with us what the khatib was talking about. Mm-hmm. And it was really quite fascinating, but it was like saying, all of you who are facing injustice, those of you that are in refugee camps, those of you that are struggling in countries like mine, for example, where I know my relatives in Libya are dealing with civil infighting and war right now, and things bombing and going on all around them. It's sort of this message of, I hear you, I've not forgotten about you, and I can send something as little as this little virus to the world at large and create total mayhem, right? And I know that can sound really grim, but in a sense, it's like we have seen such a disparity happening in our world as of late. The people that are earning so much money, the lack of care for those who are in need, who are hungry, who are lack of shelter, not safe, no medical help. They may be in political regimes that don't care for them. So it's an interesting time. And again, we're drawn back to and called to our faith to reflect and think about this social justice value of, we need to take care of one another. We are called upon to give back to the extent that you can, and be thinking about those who are without, for lack of a better term, again.
Yeah. And I would say, there's the saying of, like, God is nearer to you than your own jugular vein, right? And for people who have faith, I think that's very a good reminder, but it's also something difficult, especially when you're talking about this dichotomy of like people going through things that are so much worse than we've experienced, right? And how can they have that same perspective when that's their reality? So I wholeheartedly believe that, you know, this pandemic, it does have silver linings, and one of them is just the community coming together and showcasing like what can we do to help, right? I feel like everybody was just right on par with like what can we do to help those in need, what needs to be done. We saw campaigns that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to help people with financial hardship. We saw people sewing masks and delivering them places. We saw so many great things, and I think that's really the essence of this verse as well.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So here's another verse that kind of reminded me of social justice in Islam, and definitely want to point out that this is in the chapter 4, An-Nisa, that is dedicated to women. So, you know, it's not to miss that point either. But the verse says, when you judge between people, judge with justice. So it's being very clear that there will be times when people have disputes, right? There will be times when people are at odds with one another. But there's another verse in the Quran that also says like, and I may not say it completely perfectly, but allafa bayna khulubukum, like bringing the hearts together, right? And that whole idea of you can only bring hearts together when there's mercy and justice involved, right? So looking at these hidden gems throughout the Quran and throughout our tradition of kind of identifying like, how can we as a Muslim society, as an American Muslim society, as people in Austin, Texas, or all across the country, like what can we do that will bring hearts together? And what can we do with justice that will uplift other communities and provide equity and understanding, and hopefully all of these societal ills of racism and incarceration and so many other things, the lack of access to proper education or nutritional meals, all of these things have surroundings around social justice. And we need to look at the frameworks in which these systems are kind of oppressing the community overall, right? The issue of homelessness, the issue of so many things that revolve around social justice. Any way you want to paint it, you need to come back to it and say, like, how can I as an individual make a difference, whether that's with my time, my talent, my treasures, and what can I do, and what does Islam call on me to do to make a difference as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, well said.
Cool. So again, without surprise, another verse from Surah An-Nisa. And I think this one, you know, I feel like this verse was always like the ammunition in my back pocket whenever I like had an argument with my parents. And it was just like, stand firm in justice, whether it's against yourselves or your parents or relatives, regardless of your societal status, if somebody is rich or poor or anything, like, you know, God is the only one that can judge us in those realms, right? And here he is telling us that we should be rooted in justice, and he is the one who is just, right? So let's talk about that in terms of what we feel, what does standing firm in justice mean in like today's context?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that there is, I don't know what word you used earlier, but not a coincidence that it is from the beautiful Surah An-Nisa.
Yeah. So another example that I wanted to share in just how our tradition and our teachings reflect back on social justice. In Imam Nawawi's 40 hadith, the 34th reads, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri reported, the Messenger of Allah, peace be upon him, said, "Whoever among you sees evil, let him change it with his hand. If he is unable to do so, then with his tongue. If he is unable to do so, then with his heart. And that is the weakest level of faith. So.
Yeah, it's really beautiful to me how you sort of see these multiple ways that we are reminded from a variety of aspects within a beautiful deen about justice and about what we can do and are called to do, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think time and time again, you know, people will say, oh, like rallies never do anything, right? But at least they're acting on what they believe in, right? At least they're passionate about a cause that gets them up and, you know, angry, or at least trying to be constructive with that anger. And, you know, as long as things are done respectfully and have purpose, I'm all for it, making the world a better place. So what better way than to live this example through this hadith, to put your thoughts into actions, right? Like, look at the reverse way, like what's in your heart. And if you want to expand on that, then take action, right? And I think that's really inspiring to see that our faith encourages us to be introspective and to take action, to stand up for others who may not be as equal in playing field, and trying to uplift other people to bring them up. Because, you know, I'll even say it, as tough as it is to be a Muslim in America, there are many of us that also have privilege, right? And what are we doing with that privilege? Right. So I think at some extent there has to be this mix of, yes, our community collectively needs to move forward in so many different ways, but for those of us that, alhamdulillah, have had the convenience of education, of wealth, of our parents' sacrifice to make our generation a little bit easier, right? What are we doing with that privilege, and how are we taking that responsibility forward? So that's something that I'll leave with you to kind of stew and sit with as well.
You know, something that this brings to mind for me is the recollection that ad-din al-mu'amala, we say in Arabic, which is the way you treat, the way you act, is your exhibition of your deen, your faith. And, you know, living here in the United States, I think that there is a tendency, I watched this with my own parents. They were so fearful. Obviously, we were like, we never say we were Libyan or Muslim for fear of retaliation or whatever might happen. But there's also a lack of civic activism. And, you know, while they might have participated in that back home, the notion of you have a right and you have an opportunity and frankly a duty to do that here is something that often is overlooked or just not exercised, right? And so it's, I think, both from when you give, you're making a statement about what matters. Mm-hmm. When you step up and go to a rally, like you said, and speak upon or on behalf of what matters, you're making a difference. And it's like those things all come together. When you serve on a board and you advocate for a cause, whether it's abuse or homelessness, education for all, you name it, equity, you're making a difference. And so I think that we have to realize, especially those of us Muslims that do live here in the United States, that we have the beautiful opportunity to do what we're called to do in our everyday lives right here. And, you know, it wasn't until the Arab Spring when somebody with a big megaphone in front of the state capitol in Texas said it was a time when there was like this no-fly zone over Libya, and someone's like, are there any Libyans here? And Malik and I, my husband, looked at each other and we very slowly raised our hand, you know, but it was this fear of like, well, we shouldn't say, we were always told growing up, don't talk about where you're from for fear of discrimination, right? Well, we're in a very different stage and a very different era now. I'm not saying that there's still not discrimination. There's a lot of it, especially in the climate that we've been in. But safely, how can we make a difference? And I think that's the opportunity before us.
For sure. And, you know, there's going to always be some percentage of people who are just apathetic, right? They're like, in every society, there's someone who may not feel like their voice matters, right? But what can we do to uplift their voice, even if they themselves won't be the ones to fight for themselves, right? And I think that's also poetic in a sense of like, Islam teaches us to speak for those who are oppressed, right? And what can we do to uplift those voices? So I think in today's world, and we'll get to this a little bit later as well, is like, how can we use our power and privilege, as limited as it may be, to our benefit collectively? And, you know, obviously with 2020, we have the census going on right now. That's one easy way that families can participate. And then it's an election year, right? And every year is an election year, but this is going to be a very critical, contentious political time for us as well. So just some things to think about on that level.
Absolutely.
So I also wanted to highlight a few different examples throughout Islamic history of scenarios in which there were some themes of social justice. And of course, with all of the prophets, they had to rally their people. They were like the original startup co-founders of like Islam, right? They were the ones who were calling people to God's way. They were the ones that had to pitch their idea. They had to refine it. They had to talk to people who were living in a society that wasn't as reflective or wasn't as appreciative of faith, right? And he was taking, and they were taking people in that time to think of self-empowerment, to think of how can we change these societal ills that we see around us. So for me, even the example of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, or the Pharaoh, you know, he continuously had to uplift the people around him against the Pharaoh, right? So there's the example of when he threw his staff down and it turned into a snake. And then the Pharaoh was like, oh, this is just like magic, and I can bring a whole bunch of magicians and they can do some same stuff. But then, you know, Prophet Musa's miracle was then realized and people started following him. And that obviously upset Fir'aun, right? He was like, why are people following this one guy who isn't the ruler, I'm the ruler, all of that stuff. So that further enraged him. And we know the story, famine hits the area. Musa alayhi salam takes the Bani Israel to the Red Sea. And that's the story that we know of that plays out through the Quran. So we know how that one ends as well. And it takes Prophet Musa alayhi salam to lead people through that scenario and bring them to, you know, avoid a tyrannical leader and to uplift that community. God takes his side and helps him secure their destiny that way. So, you know, there's examples like this throughout Islamic history, and we'll just briefly go through these as well. And similarly with Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, right? His father saw in a dream that he would be selected and would favor him. He was his favorite son, right? And he said to Prophet Yusuf, like, you know, try not to share this with your brothers, or he was fearful that his siblings may do something to him, and his brothers left him behind in a well, right? We know how the story goes. But even from then, luckily, by the grace of God, there was a passing by merchant caravan that picks him up, and they take him to Egypt. But then he falls through more hardship, right? He was seduced by the chief minister's wife and then sent to prison falsely, right? And through some other miracles, he was then able to earn the trust of the current king of the time. And then he himself grew into a position of power, right? And for Yusuf alayhi salam to have that life experience, to be on the other side of injustice, but then come through that and then be just as well with other people, that is a telling example of how we should be acting as leaders in the community. Anything you want to share on those two, Fayruz?
I'm just loving listening. It's awesome. It's just, again, a repeat of multiple examples that call us to have this conversation really and be thoughtful and thinking about those ways that we can be active in this space.
For sure. So, obviously can't leave out Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And throughout history, he had to negotiate contracts with so many different tribes, and he had to be the one who was trusted, right? That he was known as the one who would speak truth, and people would entrust him with their goods as they would go on caravans and travel, right? So having that as his characteristic before he even was called to prophethood, right? He was already leading by example before that. And that's something that we should also consider, is he didn't reach his prophethood until much later in his life, right? And his whole life, he was already living in a just way. So it's not something that only prophets can be just, right? This is something that all of us need to look into, of how can we in our daily lives take this and implement it. And, he, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, sought to fix a broken system. He wanted to protect the downtrodden. He wanted to provide more for people that were suffering in the society and call them to Islam so that he could provide those services to them. So, I mean, there's so much we could say about the Prophet through the history and examples of, dealing with the people in his life, the injustices that he faced. There were people who would mock him or would throw garbage on him, and he would just kind of keep moving on, right? He would take the higher road. And even in the sense of helping other people, there are so many instances in which he was able to help other people, cure them of their illnesses through miracles and through his relation with God and everything like that. So again, we should look to how can we benefit those around us, those in our spheres of influence, those who we have in our friends, in our family, and what can we do to kind of uplift them as well.
I think that's such an excellent point. I mean, they were sent to humanity. You think about all of the beautiful prophets, from the ones we've talked about and all the others, including Sayyidina Isa and more. They were sent to be an example. And I think we're all called to be an example too, to our communities, to our children. And that's part of this conversation that we're having today about the great work that you're doing at the foundation. And for those who are tuning in, I just want to make sure you know that this isn't a Quranic lesson only or anything like that. We're actually going to get to talk about what is the work of the American Muslim Community Foundation and what are ways that we could become engaged ourselves. There's some really cool things that I know Shadia and I have talked about. Our families are interested in establishing and creating with the help of Muhi and his team there. So hang in there with us if you can. I know some of you have to scroll off a little bit early, but we'll share more with you if you can't make it through the entire time. So I'll let you carry on, Muhi.
For sure. So we'll just briefly highlight now modern history, right? I think Islam in America, as many of you know, at least 10% of slaves that were brought from Africa were Muslim, right? So if you think of Ramadan in America has been a practice for that long, right? And that's something that we should feel empowered by. And some of the more notable figures in the civil rights era of Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali being Muslim, right, using their identity as strong conviction in their faith, right, and just unabashedly, unapologetically being Muslim and being American and being Black, right? So how can we learn from those lessons and those pioneers of Islam in America for us?
Yeah, definitely.
And continuing on with that, I think even today we have amazing examples of our political leaders who are Muslim, in Keith Ellison, Andre Carson, Rashida Tlaib, and Ilhan Omar. If if we as Muslims are not supporting their campaigns, I don't know what we're doing with social justice movements, right? We need to be backing these leaders in our community. They may not represent our district, but as Muslims in America, they have our best interest in mind at the levels of government in which they are in. So this is a small plug to make sure you donate politically, and to empower these leaders to continue to be able to do the amazing work that they're doing on our behalf and on behalf of all Americans as well.
Yeah, I agree. We're really fortunate here in Texas to have Congressman Lloyd Doggett, who's not Muslim, but he is such a friend of the Muslim community and the refugee and immigrant community. And so I echo what you're saying, not let's make sure we support our Muslim brothers and sisters, but also those who are in the political system, that they get it. They understand this is a global world. They don't have a Islamophobia. They are friends, and they are incredibly supportive of us as, you know, human beings living in this fine country.
Definitely. And I think I remember seeing a stat saying that there were over 90 Muslims who ran for office in 2018.
Wow.
So, you know, the American Muslim community is continuously engaged at the local level and all the way up to the federal level. So we need to try to, you know, whatever we can do to help them, we need to create a concerted effort to do so as well.
And honestly, I never thought in my lifetime I'd get to see them in political office. So it's really very, very exciting to have that representation.
For sure. And being from Michigan, I have a soft spot in my heart for Rashida. She's a dear friend. And, you know, I've luckily been able to meet each and every one of these people, and they're just really genuine, really care for the community overall. They understand the challenges that we face. And I think that, again, we need to be doing what we can to support them as Muslims in America. So a few examples of charities that are also in this space. A few of these I'm sure you're familiar with, and some of them you may not have heard of. So briefly, you know, CARE, Muslim Legal Fund of America, Muslim Advocates, Empower Change, Believers Bailout, and Muslim Public Affairs Council. I highly recommend you look into all of these fantastic institutions when you consider giving your zakat and your sadaqah. The best part is that website on the bottom, if you go to muslimcf.org, we have a nonprofit directory where you can look into all of these organizations. We have their websites, their social media handles, everything that you would be interested in knowing about the charity, and then you can go to their websites and support them as well. So examples today, like obviously we have conglomerates and monopolies in our industry, and we have workers who are being taken advantage of. So, you know, without naming names, I'm sure you can think of a place that just delivered a package to my house or your house. And there are people who are being mistreated in these workplaces, right? So places like the ACLU can come in and represent those workers and help protect their rights and liberties and stuff like that. And then Amnesty International, I've just fallen in love with that organization ever since I was in high school, just in terms of human rights, advocacy, helping make change. They're doing so much on that level in terms of social justice overall. So I definitely wanted to highlight them as well. So now jumping into the crux of it, like in Islam, again, we started off with talking about zakat, right? And we obviously know the importance as it being a pillar of the faith. We know about sadaqah, you know, zakat, sadaqah, they're mentioned so much and frequently in the Quran and the Hadith. We know the spiritual value of why we do it. There's organizations like the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU, that does research on Muslim philanthropy. And AMCF sponsored that study. So go take a look at the Muslim philanthropy report at ISPU, and you'll be able to see what motivates Muslims in their charitable giving. And they compare it to people of other faith backgrounds, and to see how we compare. And the number one reason why Muslims in America gave was because they felt the need of those with more should give to those with less, right? And then the second was the religious aspect of it, because we believe it's a good thing. And even across the industry, Fayruz is in this philanthropy space, I'm in this philanthropy space. The research done by Giving USA showcased that Americans gave $427 billion, $427 billion in 2018. And if the Muslim community is only 1% of Americans, can we confidently say that Muslims in America are giving 1% of that? I don't think we're there yet, but I'm willing to find out what it takes to get there, right? Can we collectively say that American Muslims are giving $427 million a year? If you add up all of the budgets of the thousands of Muslim organizations, it's probably close to that, right? But I think there needs to be more structure, more organization for our nonprofit organizations. And that's a role that AMCF is willing to play in terms of sustainability and coaching. And I know your consulting firm does a lot of that as well. So kudos to you for being in this space, Fayruz, because the services that you provide are exactly what our nonprofits need to thrive. So yeah, let's hear from you in terms of kind of your thoughts on the space, and then we can go down further the rabbit hole.
I love statistics. Data is my friend. It should be all of our friend, because that's, you know, hardcore evidence of what's really going on. I think, first of all, people are blown away that much money is contributed in this country annually. I love the fact that Giving USA for decades now has been tracking this. We won't know the 2019 numbers till June, because that's the timing of when this comes out. And for people who might be wondering about, oh, well, what's this pandemic going to mean for giving? A couple of weeks ago, I had heard that $5.1 billion had already been given during this time. And that's across the gamut, from hunger to all sorts of different causes. I think too, in the number of, when you were saying if Muslims represent 1% giving, and when you add up the budgets of Islamic organizations, you know, it may get to that 427 million. But I think, you know, I know for us too, we give to causes that are also outside of the sort of faith-based.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So whether it's to education causes that are like our alma mater, or the
For
children,
sure.
you know, abuse organization, and so, you know, so on and so on, domestic violence, gosh, you could just keep going down the list.
Health research organizations,
Yes.
yeah, food banks. And I think that's the brilliant part of American Muslim Community Foundation, if I may say so myself, is if you give through, like as an individual, right? You and Malik are supporting a cause. They may not know that you are doing so because of your faith, right? And maybe that's not important to you. But at the end of the day, if we can showcase, if you give through AMCF and we turn around and give a check to a food bank in Austin, right? And they see it coming from the American Muslim Community Foundation, that's going to showcase to them that we care about their organizations and institutions as well. That's
I think the bow right there.
Yeah.
Is coming out and being proud to say, I'm Muslim and I'm called to do this, and I want to do this, and I'm doing it, alhamdulillah, through this great organization. And I know you're going to tell us about that here very shortly.
For sure. And the other piece is that ISPU study on Muslim philanthropy showcased that Muslims were just as likely to give to non-religious causes than they were to Muslim causes as well. You know, the amount of money they give might vary, but at least they're just as likely to support. So, you know, we see all the mailers that come to our houses, right? From like the Cancer Society or American Diabetes Association or March of Dimes, and our alma maters targeting us for more money and funds. But I know some people that without batting an eye, they'll send something back. every single time, right? And it might add up at the end of the year to a handsome amount, but at least each time they're giving, right? So this practice of sadaqah, this practice of philanthropy, it's continuously said that charity does not decrease our wealth, right? And there's such truth to that. And they talk about, we'll get into now, I guess, the zakat, right? It's meant as an institution, zakat as an institution is meant to combat these injustices in society. It's specifically meant for people who are poor, right? Think of in the United States, majority of people, especially before this pandemic, didn't have enough savings to help them pass $400 if an emergency happened. How alarming is that, right? And what if the solution was that Muslims cared enough to give their zakat to help these people, right? What if Islam was the solution for all of these challenges that we're facing in this country? That's the power and that's the beauty of our faith, right? So for people who are facing difficulty, if they're needy, you can give zakat to them. For the hearts coming together, hearts to reconcile over a cause, you can give zakat for that. To free bondage or pay the bonds of other people, or in today's society, if there are still slaves or captives, to free them, you can use your zakat to do that. And that's why the Believers Bailout that I mentioned on the previous slide is such a phenomenal organization to help those in debt and to help God's cause be further promoted, to help a traveler who's stranded and can't get from one place to another. And then finally, the people who collect zakat, the administrators of zakat, are eligible to use zakat for their administrative purposes. So these are the 8 categories, and there are other broad categories as well, but this is what's specifically said in the Quran. And again, financial religious scholars can answer more on how to calculate, and other organizations of endorsing them as zakat eligible. I'm just here to kind of promote the aspect that our zakat can do so much for the community, and that we should use it in the most strategic of ways as well.
Yep, agreed.
So I want to jump into a little bit more on the American Muslim Community Foundation, if you'll allow it, and just kind of talk about, again, this idea of charity in Islam. There's a scholar from Senegal, his name is Sheikh Ahmedou Bamba, and he writes a beautiful poem called Masalik al-Jinan, which is the pathways of paradise. And Qalam Institute has a fantastic podcast on Masalik al-Jinan by Sheikh Mikhail Ahmed Smith, I believe is his name. And he brilliantly breaks down this poem verse by verse. And Qalam is in your guys' backyard almost, okay? It's like in Dallas area, right? So this podcast, I started listening to it and was just captivated by how eloquently they break down this poem. And what they say is, when people are on the day of judgment, we know that there's the sirat, right? The bridge that connects us to paradise. And as we try to cross that bridge, there are going to be instances from our life that come back to us and say, oh, at this point, so-and-so happened, or at this point, you said this or that or the other. But the one thing that people in the afterlife wish that they could do is another good deed in this life, right? And what better way than giving charity, than giving zakat, than giving sadaqah, by setting up a sadaqah jariyah through your charitable giving to work for your benefit at that time. So Sheikh Ahmedou Bamba talks about how giving charity purifies our wealth. It's an affirmation of our trust in our faith. It protects us from calamity, and that it expiates our sins, and it brings joy to those who receive it and those who give it.
They've actually done physiological or like studies about when someone does give, there's an actual biological high that happens in the body of feeling so good that you're able to do something and what a blessing it is. So it's a blessing, as you say, for the person receiving it, but also for us as well.
For sure. And I'm also reminded of the flip side of this is on the day of judgment, there are 3 people who were going to paradise, and then God asked them why they did what they did. And it turns out that their intention wasn't the purest. It was for themselves. It was their ego, right? So the flip side of this is being super careful about, is it because I want fame and power? Is it because I want to be known as somebody who is very generous? Is it because of these things or the other? So our faith has a very well-balanced nature of how we should do this. And even in the Quran, it says like, or maybe it's hadith, again, I'm not a scholar, so don't quote me, but there's a tradition that talks about the left hand not knowing how much the right hand is given, or vice versa, right? And you can give anonymously, there's no harm in that, or if you want to encourage other people to give, you can give publicly, right? Again, it's about that intention and being comfortable with your intention and why you are doing it, but we are encouraged to be competitive in good deeds, right? Yeah. So I think that is also a silver lining here of like, what we are doing at AMCF is to help shift the conversation around Muslim philanthropy and to inspire families to be more proactive in their charitable giving.
Yeah.
So the way that we do that is through what are called donor advised funds. And you can go set up a DAF at any financial institution up and down the street, whether it's Schwab, Fidelity, Chase, whatever bank you bank at, they likely can provide you with a donor advised fund. But AMCF is the only institution on the market that serves the Muslim community for donor advised funds, for giving circles, for endowments, for fiscal sponsorship. So we are here for the Muslim community, by the Muslim community, to empower them and understand the intricacies of zakat and sadaqah to help you and your family make these decisions together. And we have an amazing connection to so many fantastic organizations across the country. And we have that pulse of the community needs. So we can partner with you on a vision of wanting to accomplish a certain goal and say, oh, we actually know about this organization, or they collaborate with this other fantastic institution that you should learn more about. So we're always in the know of great projects. And if we're not, we'll do the research to make sure that we understand which causes matter to you and how you can make the most impact. So a donor advised fund, on a very simple term, is think of a savings account that is for your charitable giving. And you can put money into it when you want, and you can distribute money to a charity when you want. So the main thing is, in a donor advised fund, whatever money you put in always has to go to a charity. The great thing is, you can leave it to your kids. You can engage your kids in the decisions. You can name it after your family as a foundation. And there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to that. So the benefit is you still get to donate on your own timetable. But even with the CARES Act now, the government lifted the fact that families can give more than what usually was 50% of their AGI, annual gross income, or adjusted gross income. So now families can exceed that 50%. So again, how do we use our power? How do we use our privilege? How do we use that bank account that has a few additional zeros in making impact in Ramadan during this time? If you have the financial means to, a donor advised fund is the most convenient way for you to channel your philanthropy through AMCF to still reach and benefit all the causes that you care about. So you get one tax receipt from us, and then we distribute on your behalf to the charities of your choice. Any questions or thoughts, Fayruz?
No, I just, I think we're getting closer to time, so I want you to get through it so we can leave a little bit for the questions.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, push us through. So again, the benefits, you get to put away the money now, you get to decide later. You can invest the balance, you can keep track of all your zakat and sadaqah in one place. And we vet the charities for you. So again, our nonprofit directory, if they're in there, those are all the eligible institutions that you can give to. And you can set up Sadaqah Jariyah projects so easily. And we also have memorial donor advised funds. So if somebody passes away, you can do something in their honor. And again, I mentioned that you can pass on the balance from one generation to the next. This is a little more high level, but the benefits of donating appreciated assets, obviously the stock market tanked, but if you bought stocks 10, 15, however long years ago, and they're still higher than when you bought it, you can donate that and avoid the capital gains tax. And there's a lot of value. We have a separate presentation on donor advised funds. So if you are interested, we can talk about that at length, but I do want to get to questions. So Fayruz, take it away.
Thank you so much. So yes, if there are questions, y'all, please do plug them into the chat. But some of the questions we did have, and really I'm going to just break through even this one because it might be on the minds of the people listening is, okay, I'm inspired. I've heard your presentation. This donor advised fund notion is really cool. If I want to set one up tomorrow and give you a shout, what's the base minimum I need to have to be able to do that? And how does it work?
Sure, that's a great question. So donor advised funds at other institutions, they might be a minimum of $5,000, $50,000, $250,000 sometimes.
Right.
Being a grassroots community foundation in the Muslim community, we based it off of the research from Giving USA that said the average charitable household gives about $3,000 a year. So our donor advised funds start at $2,500, and we've had families that have made partial payments into that, or obviously some that just write a check and they set up their balance with their donor advised fund ready to go. So whatever level of philanthropy you're comfortable with, we will work with you at. And we do have annual administrative fees, but they are competitive across the industry as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Here's a question too, and I will get to the ones that came up prior, but I want to make sure because I think this one is very apropos where we have kind of multiple people as part of a family who may be inspired and want to participate. And if you do have a family fund with multiple families contributing, does everyone benefit from that tax benefit or deduction?
Of course. So every donation made into a donor advised fund, or in this case, a giving circle, would be deductible. And we would keep track of that balance for you. So I'm going to jump into the next question, the first one on there about like what AMCF has done for nonprofits affected by COVID-19, using the example of a giving circle at AMCF. So we were in touch through last year. They wanted to set up a timeline for reviewing nonprofits and donating in Ramadan to charities. But then as soon as COVID-19 happened, these 18 families that give $5,000 of zakat each decided that they would bump up their timeline. So they interviewed the nonprofits earlier and they made their decisions earlier and got funding out the door. And they were able to give $56,000 to Penny Appeal for their financial hardship grant, and then $24,000 to Crescent Zakat Fund, which helps families with that are going through cancer treatment at Lucille Packard Children's Hospital, paying their additional living expenses.
Wow.
So really fantastic ways for people to make a difference with their charitable giving. And then on top of that, we set up a campaign that's ending tonight on LaunchGood. If you go to launchgood.com/AMCF Cares, you'll see a campaign that we set up in early April that is for mosques to support their imams and their staffing. So it's to help with operational costs at these mosques across the country. And then nonprofits will apply to us for that funding. So again, as a community foundation, we're hosting grant cycles. In February, we did a Black History Month initiative. In March, we did a Women's History Month initiative. So a lot of really cool ways for you to learn about different causes as well.
Wow, that's very cool. So the Giving Circle, talk a little bit about that, how that works. Is that where multiple groups come together and pool their money? Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, so in this case, it was these families all knew each other. They were family friends, and they wanted to give together. So that collective $80,000 was for them to distribute, and they voted on different charities. Each family nominated a different charity, and the charities came in and did presentations, and then they decided on two.
That's really cool. What downsides would there be, if any, between having a DAF and a private family foundation?
So the main thing is, in this industry, if you have $3 million to $5 million to put into a private family foundation, then it's worth it. If you have less than that, you might want to think of a trust or a donor advised fund. The main difference between a donor advised fund and a private family foundation is, in a private family foundation, you can hire staff, you can expense a trip, you can do other things, where a donor advised fund is really limited in only giving to a 501c3 charity.
Got it. That's very important. And so to that end, what would be the best way to give during Ramadan at this point in time?
Yeah, for sure. There's things like Launch Goods Ramadan Challenge. There's Feeling Blessed is an app that you can download. There's another one called My 10 Nights and Zakatify. So all of those are fantastic opportunities for you to automate your giving, or for you to just learn about different causes. And then, of course, I need to plug American Muslim Community Foundation, right? So if you can, create a donor advised fund. If you want to learn about other institutions through us, support our work. We are going to be setting up a nonprofit accelerator later this year, where we take 3 individuals and pair them up with a mentor and a coach and work with them through their ideas. And we have this podcast, The 5 Fast Minutes, and we're turning that into a Muslim philanthropy podcast, where we'll invite guests on for full-length episodes and everything like that. So we're doing a lot of creative work around this space of the donor ecosystem and nonprofit ecosystem, and how we can support all of that.
Boy, I love that. Are all of these things from My 10 Nights and Zakatify as resources, are they on your website if people didn't catch the names, or is that something that we could send as a follow-up, or how would
Yeah,
that?
we'll definitely send it as a follow-up, and maybe we should make a resource page on like best practices. So we're more than happy to do that.
And then tell us, last thing before we kind of wrap up, inshallah, what is the timetable if somebody did want to establish a donor advised fund with you and disseminate dollars during Ramadan?
Yeah.
What's the timing?
So we could set you up tonight, tomorrow. The process takes as quick as you're able to transfer the funds and fill out some paperwork. In order to make the transactions in Ramadan, we request knowing what charities you want to support by May 10th, so that we can turn around and get the funds to the nonprofits by the end of Ramadan.
Beautiful. Well, I think this has been incredibly uplifting, informative. I am just grateful to you and to Muslim Space for hosting this wonderful talk tonight.
Likewise.
It's a little earlier where you are in California, but wishing everybody a great iftar, a Ramadan Mubarak and Kareem. And any last closing words from you, Muhi?
No, just keep us in your dua. We are a small and mighty team. We are recruiting board members. So if you know people, send them our way. We would love to have one-on-one conversations with each of you about your charitable giving and what goals you have. And this is the stuff I geek out about every day. So thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. And thank you to Shadia again and the team at Muslim Space. Ramadan
Appreciate it, Muslim Space.
Assalamu alaikum.
All right. Wa alaikum assalam.